What would your life look like if you acted like you could not fail? Not in the arrogant, delusional sense, but from a deep, grounded, almost spiritual trust in life itself. Imagine waking up each morning not with anxiety, not with dread, but with the unshakable conviction that whatever happens, success or failure, joy or sorrow, it's all part of a deeper rhythm. That's the core of Alan Watts' philosophy. He wasn't just a British philosopher with a hypnotic voice. He was a bridge between East and West, between logic and intuition, between the mind that wants control and the soul that seeks surrender. And his ultimate message: trust life. Fully, radically, irreversibly. But what does that really mean? Let's begin with a simple but world-shattering question. Have you ever lived a single day without trying to control something? Think about it. We control our schedules, our diets, our image, our conversations, our ambitions, even our thoughts. We try to control how others see us, how the future unfolds, how the past is remembered. But Watts invites us to step back and ask, is this control real or is it an illusion? Because if we're honest, most of our suffering comes not from what happens, but from our resistance to it. Our belief that life should be different, that we should be different, that the story shouldn't include this chapter. But what if the only real mistake isn't the suffering, it's the resistance?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Alan Watts said, "The meaning of life is just to be alive." It is so plain and so obvious and so simple. And yet, everybody rushes around in a great panic, as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. This hits hard because it reveals our collective neurosis. We live like life is some kind of audition, like the universe is a stern judge watching from the shadows, evaluating our worth based on how productive we are, how successful, how good. But Watts flips the script. He says life is not a test, it's a dance. And the goal of a dance is not to arrive at a particular spot on the floor. The goal is to enjoy each step, to participate in the rhythm, to trust the music. And most of us aren't dancing, we're marching. We're striving so hard to get somewhere that we miss the entire point of being here. Now, you might be thinking, but if I stop trying to control my life, won't everything fall apart? And that's exactly the fear that Watts wants us to confront. The fear that if we trust too much, we'll be punished. That surrender is weakness. That letting go means giving up. But here's the paradox. The more you trust life, the more life begins to trust you. Not in a magical thinking kind of way. In a biological, psychological, deeply existential way. Because when you stop clutching, your hands open. When you stop forcing outcomes, you become sensitive to possibilities. And when you stop trying to dominate life, you start to cooperate with it. Watts often used the metaphor of water, but he said, you cannot control water by clutching it. You must relax and float. Life, like water, flows. It moves. It changes. And the more you resist it, the more you drown. But if you float, if you trust, you discover that the current is not against you. It is you. That's the essence of his Eastern influence. The idea of Wu Wei in Taoism, actionless action, doing without doing. It's not passivity. It's alignment. It's the art of moving with the current rather than against it. So let me ask you a deep question. Where in your life are you currently swimming upstream? Where are you forcing, overthinking, micromanaging, trying to bend reality to your will? And what would happen if you stopped? Not gave up, but let go. Could you trust that maybe, just maybe, life knows where it's going even when you don't? Watts understood that most people live in what he called the double bind of control. We are told to be spontaneous, but only in the right way, to be free, but only within systems, to trust, but only if it's safe. And this contradiction creates a deep tension in the psyche. We learn to distrust our impulses. We second-guess our intuition. We become fragmented, divided between the part of us that wants to leap and the part that's terrified of the fall. But what if falling isn't failure? What if it's flight in disguise? This is where the idea of acting like you can't fail becomes transformative. Because it's not about arrogance. It's about trusting the process so completely that you become immune to the outcome. You do the thing not because it guarantees success, but because it is true. You say what needs to be said not because you'll be applauded, but because your soul demands it. You take the risk not because it's safe, but because it's now. And in that space where action is rooted in trust, rather than fear, you become unstoppable. But not because you never fall, but because the fall becomes part of the dance. Let's make this real. Think of a time when you acted from pure trust. But maybe it was a conversation, a creative project, a relationship, a leap into the unknown. And think of how alive you felt in that moment. How light, how fearless. That's not adrenaline. That's alignment. That's what life feels like when you're not resisting it. And the tragedy? Most people only touch that feeling by accident. But Watts is saying, what if that became your baseline? What if your default setting was trust, not tension? But here's the kicker. Trust isn't something you wait for. It's something you practice. Just like courage isn't the absence of fear, trust isn't the absence of doubt. It's the decision to move forward anyway, to breathe into the unknown, to act not because you know the outcome, but because you know yourself. And that's the real revolution. Because the moment you start trusting life, you start trusting you, your decisions, your timing, your instincts, your weirdness, your honesty, your path. So the next time fear whispers, what if you fail? You answer with Watts' wisdom, there is no failure. There is only the dance. And when life throws you into chaos, and your impulse is to control, to fix, to panic, you pause. You breathe, you float. You remember that you are not separate from this wave. You are the wave, and there is nothing to control. Only something to become. Ask yourself now, what would I do differently if I truly believed I could not fail? How would I speak? Who would I become? What would I finally let go of? Because when you act like you can't fail, you're not denying reality. You're trusting it. You're not avoiding risk. You're embracing it as the very engine of life. And when you do that, when you surrender not in defeat, but in deep alignment, something shifts. You stop living like life is an enemy to conquer. You start living like it's a partner, a co-creator, a mirror of your deepest self. And that, Alan Watts would say, is the beginning of awakening. Surfing the chaos, why surrendering to uncertainty is the ultimate power. Let's go even deeper. Because if the first step in trusting life is to act like you can't fail, the next is to accept that uncertainty is not the enemy, it is the source of creativity, of freedom, of transformation. Alan Watts didn't just tell us to relax into life, he invited us to dance with the unknown, to stop bracing against every wave of change and instead learn how to surf. And the only way to surf chaos is to surrender, not with collapse, but with courage. The kind of courage that doesn't need guarantees. The kind that says, I don't know where this road leads, but I trust the road is mine to walk. Now let's be honest, our cultural conditioning is built on fear of uncertainty. But we are taught from childhood to plan, to predict, to pathologize anything we can't control. We want to know what's coming. We want to know that we're right. We want to know that everything will work out. But Watts reminds us that this is a fantasy. Life was never meant to be a straight line. It was meant to curve, to surprise, to erupt. It was meant to disorient you because disorientation is a prerequisite for expansion. You can't grow into a new version of yourself while holding on to the old map. Let me ask you something radical. What if everything you're afraid of losing is exactly the thing keeping you stuck? Your job, your identity, your relationships, your image, your plan. Watts would challenge you to consider that clinging to certainty is like trying to hold your breath forever. At some point you have to exhale. At some point you must let go, not just because you have no choice, but because letting go is the key to freedom. He used to say, the more a thing tends to be permanent, the more it tends to be lifeless. And that's the paradox. We crave permanence because we think it brings safety. But what it often brings is stagnation. In our attempt to freeze life, we kill it. We become rigid, repetitive, afraid to evolve. But life is not a static sculpture, it's a living river. And if you want to feel alive, you have to jump into that river, not just stand on the bank, taking selfies of your fear. Watts would argue that uncertainty is divine. Not because it's easy, but because it keeps the game honest. If you knew every move in advance, would you even play? If you knew every outcome, would you still care? Uncertainty forces you to show up fully, to engage, to listen, to create, and that's the beauty of it. Chaos is not failure. It's the raw material of becoming. It's the clay that your courage shapes into something meaningful. But here's where it gets real. Surrender is only powerful if it's conscious. You can't fake it. You can't say, I surrender with one hand while subtly gripping control with the other. You have to actually stop resisting. And that's terrifying, because it means trusting life even when it makes no sense. Even when everything feels like it's falling apart. Especially then. Because Watts knew that breakdown is often the beginning of breakthrough. That when life strips away what you thought you needed, it's not punishing you, it's revealing you. Let me give you a practical example. Think of a time in your life when everything felt uncertain, when the path ahead was fogged over, when the plan fell apart. And now ask, what did that moment awaken in you that comfort never could? Maybe it forced you to reassess, to reinvent, and to reconnect. Maybe it broke you open in a way that let something new in. That's what surrender does. It doesn't weaken you. It unlocks you. Watts often compared life to music. He said, "We don't listen to music to arrive at the final chord. We listen because of the movement, the rhythm, the tension and release. Uncertainty is what gives music its emotional power. It's what makes the crescendo matter." And your life? It's the same. If it were all predictable, it would be boring, meaningless, a flat line. But because it's full of mystery, it has depth. And you, as the listener, must learn to trust the song even when you don't know where the melody is going. So here's a question to sit with. What would your life feel like if you stopped trying to resolve every uncertainty and started dancing with it instead? What if your fear was not a signal to stop, but an invitation to go deeper? What if the unknown wasn't a void, but a womb, a space of gestation, of becoming, of sacred transformation? This is the place where trust becomes a superpower, but not blind faith, not wishful thinking, but embodied surrender. The kind of trust that says, "I don't know what's next, but I know I can meet it. I know I can fall and rise. I know I can adapt. I know I was made for this unfolding. Not because I'm perfect, but because I'm present." And that presence? That's the real key. Watts warns us against constantly projecting into the future or ruminating on the past. He reminds us that the only place we ever truly exist is now. And the now is always uncertain, always shifting, but also always alive. When you stop chasing certainty, you begin noticing life's subtle invitations, coincidences, intuitions, synchronicities. You start living from the inside out, rather than reacting from the outside in. This isn't theory. It's a practice, a daily discipline of letting go and tuning in. Letting go of the need to know. Letting go of the obsession with control. Letting go of the belief that safety lies in the predictable, and tuning in to the deeper flow, the pulse of life that is always moving, always guiding, always whispering, "Trust me. I've got this," even when you don't. So here's a final provocation. What would happen if you stopped resisting the chaos and started surfing it? Not just enduring it, not just surviving it, but actually riding it, with style, with humor, and with trust. Because the truth is, you don't need to know where the wave ends. You just need to stay on it, to feel it, to move with it. And in doing so, you become something very few people ever become, alive in the mystery. That's what Alan Watts was trying to teach us, not how to escape uncertainty, but how to become one with it. To live as if life is not a problem to be solved, but a paradox to be loved. Becoming the flow, why you are not separate from life, you are life itself. Now we arrive at the heart of Alan Watts' philosophy, his most radical, most liberating, most mind-bending message. You are not in life, you are life. Not a separate observer, not a puppet on strings, not a guest in someone else's universe. You are the universe itself, playing a human for a while. And until you realize this, you will always feel like you're chasing something just out of reach: security, peace, purpose, control. But the moment you awaken to this truth, the moment you stop seeing yourself as a fragment and start seeing yourself as the whole, everything changes. Suffering still comes, yes, but it no longer defines you. Fear still whispers, but you no longer obey it. Life becomes not a struggle, but a dance with yourself. Watts often asked us to imagine the universe as a vast game of hide and seek. He said, "You are the Big Bang, the original force of the universe, coming on as whoever you are." Imagine that. Your consciousness itself decided to forget who you were just to experience the thrill of remembering. You chose limitation so you could rediscover expansion. You chose form so you could rediscover the formless. And in this game, you're not a victim of life. You're the author, the actor, and the audience all at once. But most of us forget we're playing. We take the game so seriously. We think we are the mask. We believe we are the story. But Watts says, you are the storyteller. And the moment you remember that, you become free. Let's pause and ask something profound. What would you stop fearing if you knew that life wasn't happening to you but through you as you for you? That question alone can break chains, because it reframes the entire experience. That heartbreak, that failure, that confusion, it's not punishment, it's part of the plot. It's the twist that makes the story interesting. It's the moment that wakes you up. And you, the real you, are never in danger. Because the real you isn't your name, your job, your body, or your thoughts. The real you is the awareness behind it all, and the space in which it all happens. And that space, it's not separate from life. It is life. Watts loved to use water as a metaphor for this truth. He'd say, "You're not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop." Just like a wave is not separate from the ocean, you are not separate from the universe. Your consciousness is not something trapped in a skull. It's part of the infinite field of awareness, temporarily localized in a body. And just like a wave rises and falls, you too will rise and fall. You'll be born, you'll die. But just like the ocean doesn't disappear when the wave crashes, you don't disappear when your story ends. You return, you continue, you change form. This is not fantasy, it's the deepest insight of mystics, physicists, and sages across time. So here's the practical implication. If you are life itself, then what is there to control? What is there to fear? The wave doesn't resist the tide, it moves with it. The flower doesn't rush its bloom, it opens when it's ready. The tree doesn't panic in winter, it knows life is still flowing, unseen beneath the surface. And you are no different. The more you identify with the limited self, your thoughts, your labels, your roles, the more you suffer. But the more you identify with the flow, the more peace you feel. Because the flow cannot be broken. It cannot be lost. It is. Let me ask you now, where in your life are you acting like you're separate from the flow? Where are you blaming life, fearing life, trying to outsmart life? And what would happen if you stopped? What if instead of fighting for control, you leaned into trust, not passive surrender, but active participation in the mystery? What if you flowed with life, not because you gave up, but because you finally remembered you are it? This is not a call to passivity. It's a call to integration. Watts would never say, do nothing. He would say, act from the awareness that you are not apart from the process. That's the difference. When you act from separation, you act from fear. You grasp, you compete, you manipulate. But when you act from unity, you act from love, from freedom, from presence. You still strive, but the striving is joyful. You still face obstacles, but but they no longer define you. You are like a jazz musician improvising with life, not playing from a rigid script. And this changes everything. Your relationships become less about control and more about connection. Your work becomes less about success and more about expression. Your decisions become less about fear of the future and more about truth in the present. Because the truth is, you've never been separate. You've only believed you were, and that belief, that illusion, is the root of almost all suffering. Watts once said, trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. In other words, the self you're trying to protect, prove, promote, it's a mental invention, a mask, a performance. The real you doesn't need to be defined. It doesn't need to be defended. It just is. It watches. It laughs. It flows. It trusts. When you remember this, life becomes simpler, not easier, but clearer. You stop chasing meaning and start embodying it. You stop chasing peace and start being it. And here's what I want you to take from all of this. You don't need to escape your life to awaken. You don't need to go to a mountain or read 1,000 books. You just need to remember what you are, not who, what. You are not a mistake. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are life, unfolding perfectly, even when it feels messy. Especially then. The mess is the masterpiece in motion. So I ask you, one final time, what if you stopped trying to be someone and simply allowed yourself to be the flow, the consciousness, and the dance of life expressing itself uniquely as you? What if there was nothing to force, nothing to prove, only something to allow? You are not just part of the universe. You are the universe, playing, dreaming, remembering. So act like it. Trust life like it's your own heartbeat, because it is. And when you do, when you fully step into the cosmic rhythm, you won't need to act like you can't fail anymore. You will know. You never could.